Hi, I'm Commissioner Donald Palmer, Chairman of the U.S. Election Assistance Commission. Each year, the EAC holds the National Clearinghouse Awards, also known as the Clearie Awards, to recognize best practices in election administration. This year, EAC commissioners are interviewing some of the 2020 Clearie winners to further highlight best practices and get a better understanding of the technology, the initiatives, and the hard work that won the Clearie Awards. Today, I'm pleased to speak with Election Administrator Isabel Longoria from Harris County, Texas. The Harris County's office won a 2020 Clearie for best practices in recruiting, retaining, and training poll workers for their electronic support specialist high school student program. Now, poll workers generally are a very integral part of making sure our elections run smoothly. Last year, across the country, many election jurisdictions had a critical need for poll workers. Most poll workers traditionally have been over the age of 61, making them especially vulnerable to complications if they contract COVID-19. It's always good to see creativity related to recruiting and retaining poll workers, and especially examples like Harris County and their program to engage young people in this process. Congratulations on the Clearie Award, Ms. Longoria, and thank you for speaking with me today. Welcome to the EAC.
Thank you. I'm ecstatic and honored to be here. I just got this position not too long ago, so I'll be speaking on all the great work that this office has been doing. But in Harris County, we were very excited to win this as our first award in Harris County ever, which for folks who may not know, encompasses the city of Houston. So for such a large county, it's quite an honor for us.
It's quite the large county, and I have visited a few times. It's amazingly big, and congratulations on the Clearie Award. To start, can you give us a brief overview of the Electronic Support Specialist High School Student Program that you used in 2020? Any information about, your efforts to engage young people? Obviously, the fact that this is about high school students helping the voting process, I think this was a major reason why the judges really were attracted to this. So tell me a little bit about this program and why it worked for Harris County.
So as you mentioned before, Chairman Palmer, and this is something we see across the country and definitely across Texas. Most folks who we have the honor of working with as our election judges or clerks tend to be older, over 65. As someone who used to work for AARP, it's a great opportunity. Folks who have that extra time, folks who can come out and who are just civically engaged and ready. So this isn't anything about, anyone of any other age, but one thing we noticed in Texas a couple years ago, there was a statewide program that instituted saying, we want more young folks involved in elections, getting them ready to vote in the future, in their civic future. And our program just wasn't doing great. The background is, as y'all might know, we could get some high schoolers in if they found about the program magically, but then when they went to the polls, we had some, let's call it generational mixing issues, where our election judges and election clerks would say, well, we don't want them here. They're snot-nosed high schoolers. What do they know? Or they would give them jobs like putting them in the corner or just passing out the stickers, things that are important, but weren't necessarily meaningful and weren't engaging our high schoolers over time. And so what we did is take a step back and say, okay, what do we want out of this program? What is our goal? And that's to get young people interested in civic engagement over time. And how can we structure that program differently to meet those goals? So I can get into that in a little bit, but the big idea there is this is not just about finding extra people and stuffing them in, right? And finding that free labor. We actually pay these high schoolers. This is about asking, one, what is the value that young people bring to elections? And two, how can we use this as a tool to promote them and get them engaged in civic engagement early in their lives?
So some of my understanding that they helped with a number of issues like voting equipment support, electronic poll book support, language support from a bilingual perspective. How did that work out? And what challenges did you face in developing this program with those different facets?
Yeah, so you're right. So like I said, kind of before I came on and in the past, it was very much well, whatever high schoolers get to us, whatever schools get to us, we'll just accept them. We'll stuff them in a corner. There's no way that high schoolers could ever learn anything more. But we were seeing as well that as we had an aging kind of base of election clerks. With our technology, with the iPads we use for check-in, with now the new voting machines we have in Harris County, there was a disconnect in technology. And we said, you know who's tech native? Young people. So instead of just assuming that young people know nothing, what if we actually gave training to these high schoolers? And that's what they got. At least 3 hours of training before the pandemic in person, post-pandemic online. And they were trained to know how to set up the voting machines and how to troubleshoot. Because they felt much more comfortable with electronics, they then felt more comfortable troubleshooting. Where it might be a bit of a joke, but before we used to have to make calls and say, well, did you try turning the machine on? Now it was, okay, we've turned it on, we've tried plugging it in, we've gone through the updating process. Now that we're calling you, it's really because something has escalated. And so they were in charge of setting up, taking down, and the wait times app. So this is where you start connecting to some of our other innovative ideas. Y'all know we can't put trackers on voters, nor do I want to. So in Harris County, we have an app that is supposed to be updated, used to be every 15 minutes to say, how long is the line? The place that was done was controlled by the presiding judge. So even though that was the high schooler's job to do, the electronic support specialist, they would say, well, you're not allowed to touch the iPad. You're not old enough to do that. This is a grown-ups thing. And so we actually created a program through one of our vendor partners to allow them to update the wait times app from their phone, because most of them have smartphones. So now they didn't even have to go ask for permission. And so this was one, renaming them to be electronic support specialists instead of high school specialists. So in the name alone, you don't have that ageism or discrimination coming up. Training them to do more, because they can do more to help out at the polls. And then when we were recruiting them, we send out emails to every single independent school district, and over time collect the emails of teachers who are interested in these programs and blast it out to get more and more students, right, getting reached out to and replying back. And then when we got this big old heat map where people applied versus all the locations we needed them at, we gave preference to kids, to those high schoolers in their neighborhoods. So that just because you had 58 kids apply in one area, right? If you had 2 apply in another area, let's give those 2 preference to be next to their home. And not just because it helps for folks who might not be driving, but as you pointed out, in Harris County, we speak dozens and dozens of languages. What if I can find someone who speaks Urdu to be at a voting location where we know we will have more Urdu voters, so that they by default can be translators and help in that situation? Now we're tying communities to communities. Now we're tying high schoolers back into their communities, paying it forward. And then, one of our last big things was, well, if you're not getting paid like most people, why are you going to stay? And so we actually invested in high schoolers by paying them the same we do our clerks, $17 an hour, which is just a standard in Harris County. But that also, surprising to us, increased the number of kids from low-income school districts across the county who were applying. Because if you had to pick between a summer job, right, that could pay to help support your family, or a free, basically, internship where before we would only give you a letter, that's not a hard decision to make. You're going to make the decision that supports you and your family. So by paying hourly, a good competitive wage, we got more high schoolers, like I said, coming from those low-income neighborhoods who were investing, who we know sometimes don't vote as much in the future. Now they're investing equally with us. They know voting, and they get so excited, they tell their friends about it. So that's big and gushy, but to say, instead of looking at it as what's the challenges, it's what are those stress points and how do we solve around them? Not, well, it's a hard program, let's give up.
Well, you mentioned that last point is very important. And the real question is that there was some real drop-offs in poll worker recruitment for a while there. We responded with National Voter Recruitment Day, and I know localities across the country were recruiting to try to, and understandably there was a drop-off. Were the high schoolers able to really plug the gap? Were they able to make sure that there was enough individuals in the polling place to facilitate the vote? Did that also occur during early voting and election day?
Yeah, what we saw is for our July, because we had a delayed primary runoff, our July elections and our December elections. I'll be honest, in November, we had over 30,000 people apply in Harris County. That's a unique Harris County situation. Even for us in a pandemic, to get that many people was shocking, astronomical, and wonderful. And I
Okay.
wanted two things. Even when we had an abundance of election workers apply for our November presidential, we still prioritized the election support specialists, those high schoolers, because again, this wasn't just to fill the gap. This is about investing in youth early. So we wanted to place them even if we had an abundance of folks. But in those other elections where we didn't, they absolutely help plug the gap, because again, they're not just sitting there opening the door. They were trained to help to troubleshoot. And even in November, where we had a lot of election workers, because they were trained in the technology aspects, in the primary troubleshooting, it actually helped reduce the number of calls that were coming into our tech support line, into our hotline to help judges, because they could be the front line of, wait, did you turn the machine on and off? Which drew some of those easier calls off so that our support could be really dedicated to the hard to problems like, machine went up in smoke. That one we have to replace. And so I'm really excited to share, like, in those gaps, it helps us. And here's the catcher too. You know who loves staying up till midnight and 24-hour voting? High schoolers. You know who loves staying up with us from 7 p.m. to 12 a.m., unloading trucks of equipment, thousands and thousands that are coming back? High schoolers. So it was great to then use them not only at the voting locations, but to fill in that labor in other ways. So they get to see the whole process.
Well, we both know technology is a major part in facilitating, the vote, both in early voting and election day. You mentioned the timing of the wait and of the wait in the lines. And that was something that I remember working with a number of jurisdictions at the Bipartisan Policy Center. Also, one of the things I read in sort of the manual was something called, the assistance that the youth may have provided in curbside voting called bell call buzzers. And that sort of got my attention. Could you talk a little bit about the bell call buzzers and how that process worked in Harris County?
Sure. So in Texas, and therefore in Harris County, we by law are mandated to provide curbside voting options for folks who are not able to make it inside the poll physically using their feet or their legs or a wheelchair. So what that is that every voting location, and by the way, this is separate from drive-through voting. So at every voting location, you have a buzzer, and it sounds just like that. It's almost like a Ring doorbell. It's a similar technology, and it has a plaque on it that says blue curbside voting, push here, and also our phone number in case the buzzer's not working. And it comes right to the curb, and so you can drive up to it on the driver's side, and you just push the button, and that connects to a call box inside, right next to the judges table that the ES&S, right? So those high school, those election clerk specialists or support specialists, they were in charge of listening out for that and then running out and being the first point of contact so that you're not waiting for, the judges to collect the materials and get out. Our high schoolers were the first ones to go out, meet the voter, and share with them, we'll be needing your ID to bring it inside, to verify your identity, to register to vote, and then we'll be coming out with the voting machines and walking them through those steps. So interestingly enough, this will get wonky for all my elections folks out there. We changed the kind of buzzer we used just after the July election because the manufacturer told us that it could go across a football field. And we had been using that one for decades and it wasn't. And so we actually made the decision immediately in the summer to get rid of those and get machines and did some extensive testing. We put them on the other side of 4 buildings. We buried them in a box and tried ringing them because it's not just enough to buy technology and hope for the best. We wanted that rigorous testing to make sure that these buzzers were actually going to work.
So before I move on to another question, I want to follow up, the youth in the high school, I think we all have the experience of that they like to work late, but sometimes election starts way too early for all of us, but how much of a drop off using the high schoolers did you have? That was sort of an issue that some election administrators are concerned about, that if I have their commitment to come work, will they make it at 6 a.m. or 7, or even earlier? Obviously it worked for Harris County, but for those election administrators listening, how much of a drop off did you have, if any?
Not really. I mean, again, if you're getting paid, there's more of an incentive, right? Just like I'll say it, our election clerks, I'm not a morning person. Heck, I'm easier to stay up till 5 a.m. than wake up at 5 a.m. Building in those incentives, again, of real work. So they knew they weren't just showing up, right, to just be the door opener. They were going to get to do real work of helping with the technology and the setup, and had our backup as an office to do that. I think that helped them in a way. But also, I'll be honest, there's flexibility on our part. If a high school technician is late by 1 hour and you have a team of 6 or 7 people that are there setting up, are you punishing them just for being late? And what does that actually do? Right? So if the election thing was set up, it got set up, elections are running. I really that's what I'll push back. What are you incentivizing by that? What's more important to you? Timeliness, or helping someone to engage in the future of civic engagement forever in the rest of their life? And understanding that sometimes kids are kids and humans are humans, and that's okay.
Well, humans are humans. It's real difficult to work those long hours, and maybe having staged hours, or part-time poll workers has worked for certain jurisdictions instead of, the 20-hour day or 24-hour day. So let's talk a little bit about the feedback that you got from the voters or the election staff about the program when you implemented it.
Voters probably never noticed. To them, it was just someone else helping at the polls. I will say, though, that I think we got a lot of great feedback from parents, from teachers who were excited that, again, if they were promoting their students to engage in a program, their students were getting something out of it, something meaningful for that letter and for that time. Election judges, most of them, over the moon to have an extra set of hands, over the moon to have someone who understood the technology and was, again, more of tech native and not so intimidated. Over the moon, if you're someone who's engaging in civic engagement, it's hard not to talk about it all the time. I'm sure you feel the same, Chairman Palmer. I talk to everyone about voting. So even then, and having previously worked for AARP, that generational ability that now, for those long hours you might be waiting in between voters, they're talking about, well, back in 1965, this is what got me voting. This is what a poll tax used to be. And sharing that generational knowledge with those younger folks who may not experience that same kind of history was invaluable to our students as well, who made those connections more excited. And like I'll say, were there some people who still thought they were snot-nosed youths? Yes. And that's why they had our support to be there, to be paid, to have that title. Because again, it's not necessarily the feelings of an election judge that I'm worried about. It is what our youths were actually doing there and what they are learning. And this is where we would constantly push back and say, are they not doing their job, or you just don't like them there? Because those are two different things. And so I'm proud to say that I think the benefits far outweighed any grumblings we had on the other side.
So is this a program that you plan to continue using in the future?
100%. And I want to give a shout out to our staff member, Christina Nichols, who set up this project. She took it over. It'd been in place, like we said, kind of hobbling along this high school thing, but she set it up over 1.5 years ago. She, took it under her wing and then made sure that, for example, filling out the forms for parents or high schoolers, that we did it brainstorm online, first using Google Forms, and then we got her some management software technology so that every step of the process was automated, so that as she's processing upwards of 5,000 applications, that can be done expediently. So I want to give her a shout out. She's there. She's even more excited about next year. And some of the next level things we're thinking about is, what if we got those high schoolers, catch them as they're about to turn 18 and then turn them into BDVRs, or at least sharing with them, kind of an abbreviated deputy volunteer voter registrar training, so that they can help register kids as they're turning 18 back at their schools, or as they move on into their lives, they know the full cycle. And then how can we use them in the office year round, not just elections? So if anything, it's getting bigger, it's getting better. We will not stop using this anytime soon.
So what recommendations would you give to other counties, perhaps that are smaller than Harris County, on implementing a similar program, recruiting sort of the young or high school students to serve in the polling place? What are some of your recommendations?
Again, fully acknowledge Harris County is a large county, has so many resources. And so I know people are probably seeing dollar figures, but what I want to get back to is the root, We asked ourselves first, what is not working about this program and what are our goals? So again, the goals for us were not just stuff kids in a voting location, say we did our best and walk away. It was, how are we going to get them meaningfully engaged? And if they're meaningfully engaged, we bet that they would stay around longer, which they did. So think about what you're actually delegating to those high school folks, right? Can they learn about the technology? Can they help with apps or updating information? Heck, can they be the cute, youthful folks that are out talking to, the folks on curbside voting or helping walk folks in? And then how can you see it as imparting knowledge instead of just someone you have to babysit? So shifting the mentality of how you feel as an office about a high school program, then by definition shifts it for the election workers. Because if your folks are talking about it as babysitting high schoolers, then it's hard for the election workers not to get that message as well. So see it as an investment in the youth. And then if you can, do those things we know work, like the online applications through a Google form. It's completely free, right? Set up a Google form, blast it out to those schools. And then if you can, see if you can provide incentives like a little bit of pay if you're able to offer that in your county, or like we said, meaningful work. And if they can't work the entire time, figure out a time that works for them and for you. I think the payoffs are we see that the dividends are many for us in Harris County.
Well, it sounds like civic engagement was probably one of the biggest takeaways, but what was the biggest takeaway or surprise to you that, as a result of this election and the program that you've implemented in Harris County?
Yeah, so I'll give you some hard numbers. Like I said, when we really were thinking of this as an ES&S program back in November 2018, we had 707 applicants and 191 students that we actually used. In November, right, so just 2 years later, we had 7,420 applicants, 1,273 of those high schoolers who we employed or placed somewhere, right, in the election process. One, just the sheer number of high schoolers that came out. When you're going from you barely are scraping 700 to now you get 10 times as many applications, 7,000, that's telling you that, again, high schoolers want to be involved. There is I think a generation that is seeing much more about voting and wants to be involved. How can we meet them where they want to be instead of assuming the worst? And like I said, the trickle downs of our wait time apps were now updated much faster, which means that voters got better real-time information about where to go vote. And those tech calls, right? We still got a bunch of tech calls, but it was less of the kind of smaller, easier questions that take up time, and really allowed our tech infrastructure and our trained folks to be thinking about the harder problems like machine is on fire. And so the trickle downs from that really do, I think, pay back in dividends that maybe are a little harder to track and calculate, but it makes everyone's life easier.
So elections are ongoing and never really stopped. And I know that you're continually planning for the future. What's next for Harris County in this program, or generally, are you thinking of some new initiatives to experiment and try?
Yeah, like I said, for this high schooler program, it's now, by the way, those 7,420 that applied, if we didn't have spots for them, guess what? They're going to get an email in May. They're going to get an email in July. They're going to get an email in November. So we're growing that pool of people that we can reach out to, even as they become older, to get engaged. But for us, I want to tap into voter registration. How can we then turn these kids around to be ambassadors back in their own school? Rather than hearing it from lame old Isabel, how can you hear it from your peer in a way that they're going to make it much more relatable, so that we get even more folks interested, not only in being part of this, but in voting? So we'll be tracking over time. I think it'll be really interesting to see how many of those folks come back to us and say, 10 years ago, I did this as a high schooler, and now I want to be an election judge, or now I want to work for your office. That is going to be very exciting. And the rest of it, we're down to test anything in Harris County. Give us drive-through voting, give us 24-hour voting, give us all sorts of online applications if we're allowed to do it by law. We're here to be a testing ground. Our new tagline is where democracy meets innovation, and we're going to take that very seriously.
Well, I do want to confirm something. You do provide the ballot to the space station, don't you? Is that going to come from your office? And that's a separate interview that I will do separately with you. But that should win a Clearie too. So we'll talk about that in another interview. How you handled our astronauts through Houston. So congratulations again on the 2020 Clearie for best practices in recruiting, retaining, and training of poll workers. And that is hugely important, how we recruit, train, and place our poll workers because they are the backbone of our elections. Congratulations. Thank you for joining me, Ms. Longoria, and good luck in the future.
Thank you.